I set out on that overcast morning with more curiosity than sense, lured by rumors of an orchard nestled behind miles of overgrown farmland. The fog had rolled in thick and bleak before dawn, clinging to the roadside weeds and tangling around the tops of skeletal trees that hunched along the horizon. Perhaps I should have turned back when my stomach twisted at the first sign of those gnarled branches. Perhaps I should have heeded the stories about a haunted orchard where travelers were said to vanish without a trace. But something in me, some reckless yearning to discover the truth, pushed me onward. My car's tires spat gravel as I pulled onto a narrow, winding lane. Dead leaves skittered across the pavement like frantic insects. I parked near a rusted gate, barely clinging to its hinges, behind which stretched acres of meticulously ordered rows of trees. From afar, it seemed beautiful. The orchard between the rolling mists looked like something from a fairy tale. Yet, when I placed my hand on the gate's iron bar, I felt a jolt, as if I had touched a live wire. I jerked away, heart stammering. A bird cawed overhead, its sound mocking and jagged, echoing as if the orchard itself recognized an intruder. Despite the unsettled feeling that burned in the pit of my stomach, I ducked under the gate. Rows of apple and pear trees stood in foreboding silence. Heavy branches spread wide as if ready to snag wandering souls. All around, leaves dangled in limp, deathly shades of brown and black, faintly shimmering in the shifting fog. An occasional apple glinted with an inviting red. But I took no comfort from the fruit. I had already heard the whispers. The orchard was a labyrinth formed by an ancient pact, each row shifting like a living maze to entrap travelers until they collapsed in despair. I walked slowly, leaving the gate behind. The lingering hush, punctuated only by my own footsteps, was oppressive. The deeper I ventured in, the more I felt an unnatural closeness in the air. It was as if the orchard exhaled in unison with me, each breath thickening with the tepid stench of rotted fruit. At first, each row appeared straight, but when I attempted to turn back to check my path, I found that entire segments of trees had subtly rearranged themselves. Where I expected an opening, there was now a stretch of twisted limbs blocking the way. My pulse thrilled with anxious excitement, but I forced myself to remain calm. My nerves began to fray as the hours went by. The orchard offered countless identical corridors, tangled with identical knots of brambles. I cursed under my breath, wishing I had left markers behind. The air chilled, and the sky, once pearly gray in early morning, turned a bruised purple as dusk struggled to settle in. Shadows stretched longer among the long-limbed trees, and I felt an indescribable sense of being watched. Now and again I swore I heard a soft rustling at my back, yet every time I spun around, I saw only wooden silhouettes and drooping fruit, as motionless as statues. At last, I came into an opening, an old shed with missing planks in its walls, half buried beneath decades of undergrowth. I needed shelter, if only for a moment, and stepped through its half-open doorway. Inside, it smelled of mildew and stale hay. Dim light filtered through where the roof had collapsed, and among the debris, I spotted something perched in a corner. A scarecrow. It was slumped against the wall, face turned toward the door. Ragged burlap hung from its body, and what remained of its hat was riddled with holes. A wave of unease swept over me, for the scarecrow seemed too lifelike, as though it might leap up at any second. The lumps of straw in its limbs gave it an oddly human shape. I edged closer, and my eyes faintly registered the scraps of cloth covering its form. These looked suspiciously like genuine garments, torn in places and stained dark. Even the gloves stuffed with straw appeared like the remains of real human hands. I gagged at the thought and backed away, only to trip on a hidden root. I staggered. For a moment, I caught the scarecrow's hollow gaze locked onto me. In the gloom, it felt like I was glimpsing actual eyes behind those two ragged holes. But it did not move, and I realized it was my exhaustion playing tricks. Still, my fear soared. After leaving the ruin of the shed, the orchard seemed to close in on me. My attempts at self-reassurance crumbled as the twisted boughs parted ways, behind and ahead, without any logic. The rows gave the impression that they were shifting at will. Branches brushed my face like phantom hands. I tried to recall the path I had taken earlier, but it all blurred into the same hateful monotony. Darkness settled thickly overhead, and the orchard was like an endless labyrinth from which no cry for help could escape. That was when I heard a faint voice, perhaps singing, although the melody was fractured and discordant. If not for my desperation, I might have assumed it a trick of the wind, but with urgency mounting in my chest, I followed that sound through the orchard. The voice would subside for a moment, then flicker back again from another direction, like a taunt. Finally, I found a clearing, where another traveler had set a meager campfire, the smoky flames licking the damp air. She sat by the fire, knees drawn against her chest, head slightly bowed. "Hello?" I ventured softly, stepping into the flickering circle of firelight. She looked up, wide-eyed. Her face held the raw edges of fear mingled with relief. Draped in a battered coat, her cheeks smudged with dirt, she looked as though she'd been wandering for days, maybe weeks. "Don't come too close," she warned, though her tone wasn't threatening. It was resigned. "Things happen here. This place twists everything, even kind intentions." I respected her boundary, kneeling a few feet away from the fire. "I'm lost," I confessed. "I can't find the way out." She glanced around nervously. No one finds the way out unless the orchard allows it, but mostly it doesn't. All we have is the orchard. The labyrinth grows in circles. Each row leads to another until you're forced to keep going deeper. Haven't you noticed how the trees move? I nodded, my skin prickling. "Do you know the stories about why it's like this?" She shrugged, eyes flickering with dread. "Some say a farmer once struck a deal with a dark power to keep his orchard thriving. Others claim the orchard itself is alive, feeding on lost wanderers who stray too close. All I know is that travelers who linger too long are found again as scarecrows." Her voice cracked on that last word. "It's true, I've seen them, standing in the rows pinned to the earth. It can happen so slowly that you don't even realize you're turning into one of them." The possibility seemed absurd, but images of the scarecrow in the shed flashed through my mind. Suddenly, the orchard's silent threat transformed into something unspeakably worse. "How do we stop it?" I asked in a hushed voice. She shook her head wearily. "I don't know. I've been trapped here for 2 days, maybe 3. Time doesn't feel the same here." She extended one hand into the firelight, revealing the coarse fibers sprouting from her skin, like dull straw weaving through her flesh. Horrified, I choked down a scream. She forced an empty smile. "It started this morning," she whispered. "First my fingertips, then my arms. It's taking me." Before I could respond, an unearthly moan drifted through the orchard. The fire's glow trembled against the trees. My companion clenched her fingers together, as if fighting the transformation. "They're here," she hissed. "A warning was left for me. They come in the night, the orchard's guardians, to gather the stray souls." I tensed, scanning the darkness beyond the fire. Shapes shifted in the swirling gloom, and what sounded like the scrape of brittle limbs echoed from the next row. My nerve broke. "Run!" I whispered. We both stumbled to our feet. I grabbed her hand, though she recoiled at first, uncertain if I were leading her into a trap. But something compelled me to keep us both alive, or at least to try. We ran headlong between the orchard's twisted lanes, the night air cold against our faces. Branches slapped at our shoulders, snagging our hair. The orchard seemed to groan and rustle around us, its bark breathed with quiet malice, guiding us in loops. Finally, in our terror, we ducked into a wide space, ringed by crooked trunks. At the center of this clearing stood an ancient, gnarled tree with a broad trunk that looked black under the moonlight. Its roots jutted up from the earth like gripping claws. My unknown companion sagged to her knees, breathing hard, and I hardly fared better. An eerie hush settled in, as if we had stepped into the orchard's heart. My companion looked at me with desperate eyes. Her cheeks glistened with tears. I can't keep running," she gasped. "My legs are so heavy. It's like they're filled with straw. I don't know how much time I have left." She laughed bitterly. Who am I kidding? Time doesn't matter here. I reached for her shoulder, unsettled by the feel of rough fibers beneath her fraying coat. Her arms were stiffening. Her eyes carried a faraway look. "We have to keep trying," I insisted, but even as I said it, I felt the orchard's quiet compulsion to sink into despair. I felt it swirling around me, coaxing me to give up. My head pounded, and swirling shapes formed at the edges of my vision. "We aren't going to die here," I managed to say, though my voice trembled. Suddenly, a distant flutter of movement made me look up. Within the crooked ring of trees, I noticed something pinned between the twisting branches. A figure, seemingly suspended, with arms outstretched. My breath caught in my throat, for it resembled another scarecrow. The cruciform pose was unmistakable. A torso rigged to a branch, arms spread like broken wings, head leaning limply forward. As I drew closer, I noticed bits of tattered cloth and hair swaying in the breeze. The face drooped forward against its chest, and though I could barely see its features, I sensed a once-living soul imprisoned in that husk. My companion pushed herself up with shaking limbs, and we edged toward the figure. In the hush I heard an agonized moaning, so faint it might have been the wind. The smell of rotten leaves and moldy straw clung to the scarecrow's form. Then, without warning, its head jerked up. What I saw made my stomach lurch. Its eyes were tightly shut, but the lids quivered, as if whatever soul remained was in constant torment. Cloth was fused to skin. Stray bits of straw stuck out from half-rotten arms, which pinned the figure to the trunk of the tree. I stumbled backward in horror, dragging my companion with me. The orchard's magic was brazen, defying all reason. "Please," the scarecrow groaned, so softly it was like a dying breath. "Help me." I opened my mouth, but words failed. Its tortured expression cut through me. My companion turned away, burying her face in her hands. Before either of us could respond, the orchard's silence broke with a whispering rush. The branches overhead rustled, sending leaves falling in a dusty rain. A presence-some malevolent force lurched through the orchard, slithering along branches and trunks. It felt like an entire swarm of invisible watchers pressing in. We heard the dreadful scrape of roots against soil, the orchard's slow respiration drawing us deeper still. My companion whimpered as fresh straw sprouted beneath the torn edges of her sleeves. A flicker of courage, or perhaps desperation, fueled me. "There must be a way out," I muttered. I forced my feet to move, gathering my companion's arm over my shoulder so I could support her. The orchard seemed to groan in protest. We hurried onward, not in any clear direction, for every route looked the same, except for the subtle presence of watchers behind each tree. I felt their eyes follow us, though I saw nothing but bark and shadow whenever I turned. At length we stumbled upon a sign hammered into the ground, its paint chipped away. I knelt to brush off the dirt. Though weathered beyond recognition, I managed to make out a single arrow pointing right. Was it left there by the orchard's original keeper, or by some other doomed wanderer? We had nothing else to guide us, so we turned right. The orchard's corridors led us onward, weaving through twisted boughs that scraped overhead like barred ceilings. Eventually, we found an opening with a tangle of vines forming a partial arch. Cautiously, we ducked beneath it. No sooner had we entered that space than something snagged my ankle. I yelped, nearly toppling. The vines around the base of a tree had curled around my leg. With a cry, I yanked free, noticing that my jeans bore splotches of a foul, sap-like residue. My companion cried out as the orchard tugged her from the other side. The orchard's branches seemed to sense our presence and reached out in a slow, relentless manner. We fought them off with desperate thrashing, slipping between the orchard's creeping growth in a swirl of panic. My companion's coat tore, revealing more of the straw-like growth rising along her skin. She gasped as if every breath was agony. We managed to break loose and stumble out of the arch, where fresh moonlight fell through a break in the canopy. My heart lifted momentarily at the sight of the sky, which seemed a pale promise of freedom. Then I noticed a scattering of forms in the clearing, stooped at eerie angles among the orchard's roots. They were scarecrows. No, they were more than that, for their chest rose and fell with shallow breath. Some were pinned to stakes, others slumped against tree trunks, all in various stages of transformation. Straw replaced limbs, faces contorted silently behind tattered cloth, eyes rolling in abject terror. Every fiber of my being screamed to flee, but my companion and I were already in the orchard's innermost lair. A breeze hissed through the branches, forming words in the rustling leaves. Stay. Stay. Or perhaps it was my own frantic mind. My companion trembled at my side, and I finally dared a glance at her face. Her cheeks were drawn, and her gaze had grown glassy. Her lips worked soundlessly as though she wanted to speak but couldn't muster the breath. We heard a crackling nearby. One of the living scarecrows had managed to move, scraping straw-stuffed limbs against the ground. It seemed to reach out toward us in a final, fruitless plea. Then it collapsed. The orchard's roots curled around its waist, dragging it inch by inch until the final vestige of life was consumed. I retched, sweat beading on my brow. Yet even in my horror, I was aware that we too were destined for such a fate if we didn't find an escape. A trembling push forward brought us to another tangled pathway, the orchard looming overhead like a prison in endless night. We were forced to circle around, guided by some instinct or faint memory of the orchard's rumored center. Leaves crackled beneath our feet. My companion's voice finally rose in a desperate rasp. "We can't keep going." She doubled over, clutching at her stomach. I watched, damned to witness her torment, as burlap-like fibers spread up her neck. She was diminishing, as though the orchard had already claimed her name and identity. Panic threatened to unravel me. I felt an itch at my own neck, though I prayed it was only sweat. "We can't let it take us," I muttered, swallowing hard. "Not like this." A fleeting possibility flashed in my mind. The orchard had a central root, or a tree that anchored the rest. If the stories about a black-hearted orchard keeper were true, maybe that twisted heart still lay hidden, protected by centuries of malignant growth. If there was a chance to break the orchard's hold, it would be there. I clung to the notion blindly. To our left, a faint glimmer caught my eye. It could have been moonlight reflecting off metal, or something equally innocuous. But in this place, nothing came without significance. Gathering what strength I had, I steered my companion in that direction. Another clearing opened before us. In the center grew a massive pear tree that contorted upward, branches mimicking claws. At its base was a table-like stone, etched with runes or symbols I couldn't decipher. Behind it rose a standing scarecrow, spiked into the ground with a pitchfork. It wore a decaying coat, hat brim drooping over an agonized burlap face. Wind stirred its threadbare hair. Something about it looked freshly made, though it bore the marks of age. It seemed to guard that stone like a sentinel. As we approached the stone, my companion wavered, stepping away. Her transformation had advanced. Fear and disorientation had hollowed her eyes. "The orchard hates intruders," she mumbled, voice muffled as though trapped behind a wall. Straw poked through her parted lips. I held her shoulders, ready to drag her out of the orchard by main force if necessary, but she was heavy in my arms, as though her body had gained the density of bundled hay. I looked at the stone. The shallow carving on its face seemed to depict a branching tree locked in a ring of arcane symbols. In one corner were smaller engravings of a figure kneeling, arms raised as if entreating the orchard. My heart hammered. Instinct swept over me. This had to be the orchard's focal curse. Carved in stone centuries ago, Maybe destroying it would free us from this labyrinth. But with no sledgehammer or implements at hand, how could I break the orchard's hold? Desperation flared. I seized a fallen branch that looked thick enough to use as a club. Summoning all my rage and fear, I slammed its rough end against the stone's surface, over and over, determined to chip away at those hateful symbols. With each strike, I felt the orchard recoil in a tangible wave of anger. Limbs rattled overhead, leaves spinning in a vortex. My companion clutched her ears, her eyes rolling back as she fought the orchard's infiltration. The living scarecrow that guarded the stone turned its head slightly, the pitchfork quivering in its straw hand. A horrifying shriek erupted from the orchard, as if the entangled souls cried out in unison. The orchard came alive around us, branches lashing violently. Footsteps pounded behind me. I spun, startled to see that the scarecrow had pulled itself free from the pitchfork's prongs, stepping away with a sickening lurch. Shreds of straw and cloth fluttered from its unsteady frame. It staggered closer. In the moonlight, I glimpsed an expression of utter agony beneath the burlap face, as though some cursed spirit was compelled to motion. I raised the branch to defend myself, though my arms shook. The orchard seemed to contract, pressing inward. I swung the branch at the scarecrow, connecting with a dull thud. Instead of collapsing, it seized the branch and ripped it from my grip with surprising strength. Then it raised the pitchfork with jerky motions, prepared to drive its iron tines straight into my chest. Fear seized me, and I braced for the blow. But my companion, partly lost in a haze of straw, tottered forward. With an inhuman cry, she grappled the scarecrow from behind, forcing it off balance. The pitchfork missed me by inches, clattering against the stone. They both tumbled across the ground. For a moment, I wasn't sure who was who, as their forms were so alike, two nearly scarecrow figures thrashing in the orchard's clearing. Then I realized what she was doing, sacrificing herself to buy me time. Driven by adrenaline, I seized the pitchfork and brought its handle down on the carved stone, bashing again and again. Chunks of ancient rock crumbled away. I poured every ounce of my being into destroying that cursed inscription. The orchard howled, wind whipping through the clearing in a roar of swirling leaves and dust. Over the raging wind, I faintly heard my companion's voice, or maybe just an echo. Hurry! The orchard's magic threatened to tear her fully into its embrace, but she fought with everything she had left. By the time my arms ached beyond measure, I had shattered half the reaching tree symbol and crushed the kneeling figure. A blast of cold air exploded outward, nearly tossing me to the ground. The orchard's fury dissolved into a deafening silence, as though the entire labyrinth was caught in a moment of suspended breath. Then, with a final swing, the center of the stone cracked, splitting the orchard's dark heart. The hush that followed was suffocating. Slowly, row by row, the trees began to shift in a different way, this time unraveling their labyrinth. Branches parted, forming corridors that aligned like a path to an exit. The orchard's oppressive energy lifted, though not entirely. A deep sense of mourning drifted across the clearing, as if the orchard's malevolent pride was shattered. I glanced for my companion, only to find her slumped near the battered scarecrow. Her head hung low, and her hand still half human, half straw clutched the ground. The orchard could no longer transform her further, but the damage was done. Tears blurred my vision. I crawled to her side. Her breathing was ragged, her skin a nightmare of straw and flesh. She lifted her gaze to me. "Go," she whispered, voice little more than a sigh. "Can't trap you anymore. Don't let yourself become like me." She tried to smile, but it twisted her features into a grimace. We both knew there was no going back for her. I cupped her cheek, ignoring the scratch of straw. "I'm sorry," I murmured, tears burning. She didn't respond, only closed her eyes as if finally succumbing to sleep. The orchard's hostility had faded, but it was replaced by an echo of sorrow that pressed on my chest. I rose, numb with shock and despair. I could see the path now, a narrow corridor of parted branches, leading out from the orchard's center. A place that had been impossible to escape only moments before was now letting me go. Step by step, I walked toward that opening. In the hush, the orchard's leaves rustled with a softer voice, no longer malicious, but regretful. I dared not look back, except once, catching a final glimpse of my companion's unmoving form. Had the orchard's curse truly lifted, or had it only peeled away enough to release one's soul? Either way, I forced myself forward, the orchard's cold wind brushing against my neck as if it was giving me a final haunted farewell. I hadn't walked far when the trees parted one last time, revealing the gate where I first arrived. The rusted iron sagged on its hinges, and beyond it, my car sat untouched in the gray dawn light. Time had passed strangely within. What felt like a lifetime had only been one endless night in the outside world. I shuddered as I stepped through the gate. My legs felt like water, my mind heavy with the orchard's last echoing whispers. The orchard no longer resisted me leaving, its labyrinth undone. Once reached my car, I hesitated, turning to face the orchard. The edges of the trees shimmered with the light of early morning. Could more victims be trapped inside, pinned to stakes or turning slowly to straw? I had destroyed the orchard's living heart, yet the orchard itself might remain, unraveling or perhaps reforming in slow defiance. Even as I watched, the branches seemed to droop in resignation, but a faint rustling hinted they might never truly die. Then I heard the distant echo of a scarecrow's moan, and I recalled the orchard's legacy of silent guardians. This was no place for the living. I drove away, tears blurring my sight, haunted by what I had witnessed. Every time I blinked, I saw their faces, the scarecrows, twisted in eternal torment, and each time, I relived the moment my companion fought the orchard's guardian, giving me the only chance to shatter that stone. The images settled in my mind, a lifetime's worth of nightmares in a single night. I realized that those unlucky souls might now be freed from endless torment. Perhaps the orchard's power over them was broken, or perhaps their redemption lay in final death. But the notion offered me little comfort. In the days and weeks that followed, I discovered I was not the same. A hollow sense lingered, as though I had left part of myself under that orchard's boughs. At night, I dreamt of suffocating in straw, my arms tied to a post, the orchard roots writhing below. When I startled awake, I felt the faint impression of something scratchy behind my eyelids, like a ghostly memory. In the mirror, I checked my skin for any sign of creeping burlap or stiffening limbs. So far, I remained flesh and bone. Still, the orchard left its mark. Despite everything, I found myself drawn back to the farmland's edges at times, always stopping just short of the orchard's boundary. It was quieter now. Birds even nested in some of its branches, but a hush remained at its core. The orchard was no longer full of twisting illusions, and the gate was broken wide open. Yet the trees maintained a haunted stillness, as if biding their time. I never again ventured beyond that threshold, for fear that its labyrinth would reawaken and finish what it had begun. It demanded respect. To this day, I carry the memory of that cursed orchard, its silent rows forming an unholy labyrinth. When the winds grow cold in late autumn, I sometimes hear a faint rustle that calls to mind a voice in the leaves. Then I recall those half-living scarecrows, pinned to the trees and choking on moldy straw. I remember my companion's final sacrifice, and the orchard's anguished wail as I destroyed the stone. And in those quiet, shivery moments before dawn, I cannot help but wonder if the orchard truly let me go, or if part of me remains there, bound in some corner of those twisted rows, one more living scarecrow, waiting for the last thread of its soul to unravel.